"This is my house now. You need to leave by the end of the month." Those were the words my daughter-in-law Karen spoke to me that Sunday morning while I was watering the roses in my own garden. She said it so casually, like she was asking me to pass the salt, like she was doing me a favor by giving me 30 days instead of throwing me out immediately. I turned to look at her, still holding the watering can, water dripping onto my shoes. I searched her face for some sign that this was a joke, some hint of humor or sarcasm. But her eyes were cold, calculating, the same eyes that had looked at me with barely concealed contempt for the past 3 years. I asked her what she meant. She crossed her arms and told me that things had changed, that she and my son Derek needed their space, that a woman my age should really be in a facility where she could be properly cared for. A facility? As if I were a broken appliance that needed to be stored somewhere out of sight. I am 71 years old. I worked as a registered nurse for 43 years. I raised 2 children alone after my husband died of a heart attack when our boys were still in elementary school. I paid off a mortgage, put both my sons through college, and saved enough to buy this very house we were standing in. This house that Karen was now claiming as her own. I didn't say anything. I just looked at her for a long moment, then turned back to my roses and kept watering them. I heard her make a frustrated sound behind me before her heels clicked back up the porch steps and into the house. My house. The house I had purchased with my own money 4 years ago. Let me explain how I ended up in this situation, because I know it sounds unbelievable. It sounds like the kind of story you hear about other people, never yourself. When my husband Robert died 32 years ago, I was left with 2 boys, ages 8 and 6, a mortgage I could barely afford on a single nurse's salary, and about $2,000 in savings. I worked double shifts at the hospital for years. I picked up every holiday, every weekend, every overnight shift nobody else wanted. I missed school plays and soccer games and parent-teacher conferences. I ate dinner standing up in the hospital cafeteria more often than I sat down at my own kitchen table. My older son Michael understood. He grew up to be a doctor, moved to Seattle, calls me every Sunday, and flies out to visit 3 times a year. He sends me flowers on my birthday and remembers the anniversary of his father's death every single year. Derek was different. Derek was the baby. The one who needed more attention, more reassurance, more everything. When Robert died, Derek was only 6. He didn't understand where his daddy went. He would cry at night, asking when daddy was coming home. I held him through those nights. I promised him I would never leave him, that I would always take care of him. Maybe that was my first mistake. Maybe I made promises I couldn't keep, or maybe I kept them too well. I paid for Derek's college education at a private university, $42,000 a year for 4 years. I took out loans against my house to cover it. I told myself it was an investment in his future. He graduated with a degree in business administration and got a job at a marketing firm making $65,000 a year. I was proud. I thought my sacrifices had paid off. Derek met Karen at a work conference when he was 28. She was beautiful, polished, the kind of woman who always looked like she had just stepped out of a magazine. They got engaged after 6 months of dating. I was happy for him, even though something about Karen made me uneasy. She never quite looked at me directly, her smiles never reached her eyes. But I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was just a protective mother who would never think anyone was good enough for her son. The wedding cost $85,000. Derek asked if I could help. I gave them $30,000 from my retirement savings. Karen's parents contributed nothing, though they drove a Mercedes and lived in a gated community. I didn't ask questions. I just wanted my son to be happy. After the wedding, Derek and Karen moved into a small apartment in the city. They visited occasionally, always around dinner time, always leaving with containers of leftovers. Karen would look around my old house with an expression that bordered on pity, commenting on how dated the kitchen was, how small the backyard seemed, how the neighborhood had really gone downhill. Then, 3 years ago, Derek came to me with a proposal. He said they were tired of apartment living, that they wanted to buy a house, but the market was so expensive they could never afford anything decent. He asked if I would consider selling my house and using the money to buy a bigger place where we could all live together. He said it would be perfect. I would have company in my old age. They would have help with household chores and eventually with children. It would be a win-win situation. I thought about it for weeks. My house held so many memories. Robert and I had bought it when we were newlyweds. My boys had grown up there. Every room held a piece of my history. But Derek was so enthusiastic, so excited about the idea of building a life together. And I was lonely. I had retired from nursing the year before, and the empty house felt too quiet, too full of ghosts. So I agreed. I sold my house for $480,000. I added another $120,000 from my savings. $600,000 total. Derek found a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial in a nice suburb, and I paid for it in cash. The whole thing. In cash. But here's where I made my mistake. Here's where my trust in my own son blinded me to what was really happening. When we went to close on the house, Derek suggested putting it in his name for tax purposes. He said something about property taxes and estate planning and how it would be easier to transfer to him eventually anyway, since I wasn't going to live forever. He laughed when he said that last part. I laughed too. I didn't think anything of it. This was my son. The baby I had rocked to sleep, the boy I had sacrificed everything for. Why would he ever do anything to hurt me? I signed the papers. I put a $600,000 house in my son's name without my name anywhere on the deed. For the first year, things seemed fine. I had my own suite on the first floor, a bedroom and bathroom, and a small sitting area. I cooked dinner most nights. I kept the house clean. I tended the garden. Karen tolerated me, though she rarely spoke to me unless she needed something. Derek worked long hours and was often too tired to talk when he came home. The second year, things started to change. Karen began making comments about my age, about how I sometimes forgot where I put my glasses, about how maybe I shouldn't be using the stove anymore because what if I forgot to turn it off? She started talking about me to Derek as if I weren't in the room. She would say things like, "Your mother seems confused today," or, "Have you noticed she's getting more forgetful?" I wasn't confused. I wasn't forgetful. I had spent 43 years as a nurse, monitoring medications and vital signs and complex treatment plans. I had a mind like a steel trap, but Karen was planting seeds, and I was too naive to see what she was growing. The third year, the year this story really begins, Karen stopped pretending altogether. She would sigh heavily whenever I entered a room. She would leave dishes in the sink for me to wash, then complain to Derek that I wasn't pulling my weight around the house. She would schedule family dinners and forget to tell me, then act surprised when I showed up. "Oh, Dorothy, we didn't think you'd want to come. It's at a restaurant you wouldn't like." But that Sunday morning in the garden was when everything changed. When Karen told me I had to leave, something inside me cracked. Not broke, cracked, like a window that's been hit but hasn't shattered yet. I finished watering my roses. I went inside. I found Derek in the living room, watching football. I asked him if he knew what his wife had just said to me. He didn't look up from the television. He told me Karen was right, that they needed their space, that it was time for me to find my own place. He said it so casually, like he was telling me the weather forecast. I asked him where exactly I was supposed to go, with no house and no money. He finally looked at me then, and his eyes were the eyes of a stranger. He told me I should have thought about that before I gave everything away. He said I made my choices, and now I had to live with them. I went to my room and closed the door. I sat on my bed for a long time, listening to the football game through the walls, listening to Karen laughing at something, listening to the life going on in the house I had paid for while I was being discarded like yesterday's trash. But I didn't cry. I was too stunned to cry. Instead, I started thinking about all the small things I had noticed, but explained away. Thinking about the mail I never seemed to receive anymore. Thinking about the bank statements I hadn't seen in months because Derek had convinced me to go paperless and let him manage the accounts since he was so good with finances. Thinking about the documents I had signed without reading carefully because my son told me it was just routine paperwork. The next morning, I did something I should have done years ago. I went to the bank. I had to take an Uber because my car, the car I had bought and paid for, had been sold 6 months ago. Karen told me I was too old to drive safely. Derek agreed. I handed over the keys without a fight. Another mistake. At the bank, I asked to see my accounts. The young man behind the counter looked at his computer screen for a long time before telling me there seemed to be some kind of problem. He asked if I could wait while he got his manager. The manager, a woman about my son's age, came out with a folder and an expression that made my stomach drop. She told me that my savings account, the one that had held the remainder of my retirement funds, about $93,000, had been closed 8 months ago. The money had been transferred to another account. My name was not on that other account. I asked her who had authorized this. She showed me the paperwork. My signature was on it, except it wasn't my signature. It was close, very close, but I had signed my name the same way for 71 years, and I knew my own handwriting. I asked about my checking account. That one still existed, but the balance was $412. There should have been about $15,000. The manager showed me the transaction history. Withdrawals of $500, $800, $1,000 at a time over the past year, all at ATMs, all with my debit card. The card that had gone missing from my purse 6 months ago, the one Karen said I must have lost because I was getting so forgetful, the one I had canceled and never bothered to replace because Derek said he would take care of any expenses I needed. I left the bank feeling like I was walking through a dream. A nightmare, actually. The kind where you're trying to scream but no sound comes out. When I got home, I went straight to my room and started searching. I searched through every drawer, every folder, every box I had brought with me from my old house. And I found things that made my blood run cold. I found a credit card statement, a card in my name that I had never applied for, $27,000 in charges, designer handbags, high-end electronics, restaurant bills from places I had never been to. I found a copy of a document giving Derek power of attorney over my financial affairs. My signature was on it, except, again, it wasn't my signature. I found letters from my son Michael that had been opened, read, and hidden in the back of my closet. Letters asking why I wasn't returning his calls, why I had seemingly disappeared, why I hadn't come to visit for Christmas like we had planned. Letters I had never seen because someone had been intercepting my mail. I sat on the floor of my room, surrounded by evidence of betrayal, and finally I cried. I cried for the son I thought I knew. I cried for the money I had worked my entire life to save. I cried for the house I had given away, the independence I had surrendered, the dignity I had allowed to be stripped away piece by piece while I made excuses and looked the other way. But then I stopped crying. I dried my eyes, and I got angry. The next day, I called Michael. He answered on the first ring, his voice frantic with relief. He said he had been trying to reach me for months, that every time he called the house, Derek said I was sleeping or not feeling well or didn't want to talk. He said he was about to fly out and show up at the door because he was terrified something had happened to me. I told him everything. Every detail. Every betrayal. Every dollar. The line was silent for a long time after I finished. Then Michael said 2 words that changed everything. He said, "I'm coming." 3 days later, Michael arrived. He had taken a leave of absence from the hospital where he worked. He had already contacted a lawyer, a friend of his who specialized in elder abuse cases. He had booked a hotel room for both of us because he didn't want me spending another night in that house. When we walked into the living room to tell Derek and Karen I was leaving, their faces were almost comical in their surprise. They had gotten so used to me being invisible, so confident in their control, that they never expected me to fight back. Derek tried to play it cool. He asked Michael what he was doing here, saying it was nice to see him but they weren't really prepared for visitors. Michael didn't even acknowledge him. He just helped me carry my suitcase to his rental car. Karen followed us out to the driveway. She told us we couldn't just leave, that there were things we needed to discuss, that this was all a big misunderstanding. I turned around and looked at her. I told her I understood perfectly, that I understood I was a fool who trusted the wrong people, but I wasn't a fool anymore. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen, laid out my options. I had been the victim of elder financial abuse, identity theft, and fraud. The forged signatures on the bank documents and power of attorney were a crime. The misuse of my accounts was a crime. Even putting my name on a credit card without my knowledge was a crime. But the house was more complicated. I had willingly signed it over to Derek. I had been of sound mind when I did it. The fact that I had been manipulated emotionally didn't change the legal reality that the house was now legally his. Unless, Patricia said, unless I could prove undue influence. unless I could prove that Derek had manipulated me into signing over the house through fraud or deception. I thought about it. I thought about how Derek had presented the whole thing as a family arrangement, how he had talked about tax benefits and estate planning while glossing over the fact that I would have no legal claim to the property I paid for. I thought about how Karen had pushed for the arrangement, how she had been the one to find the house, how she had been the one to suggest I sell my old home. And then I remembered something. I remembered that when we closed on the house, I had asked for copies of all the documents. Derek said the title company would mail them to me. They never arrived. I had asked about it once, and Karen said sometimes these things got lost in the mail, not to worry about it, but I had worried about it. I had been a nurse for 43 years, and nurses document everything, so I had made my own copies. I had photographed every single document on my phone before signing. I had forgotten about those photos. They had been backed up automatically to the cloud, where they had sat for 4 years, waiting. When Patricia saw those photos, she smiled. One of the documents was an agreement stating that the house was being purchased with my funds and that I would retain a life estate, meaning I had the legal right to live there until my death, regardless of whose name was on the deed. My signature was on it. Derek's signature was on it. Karen's signature was on it. I had no memory of signing this document. Neither did Derek, I imagined, because I was betting Karen had slipped it into the stack of papers during closing, counting on everyone to sign without reading too carefully, planning to destroy it later and pretend it never existed. But she hadn't counted on a 71-year-old nurse who documented everything. Patricia filed the lawsuit on a Tuesday. Derek and Karen were served on Wednesday. By Thursday, my story was starting to spread through the neighborhood, through Derek's office, through social media. Karen had made a fatal mistake, you see. Over the past year, she had been posting on Facebook about what a burden it was to care for her aging mother-in-law. She had written long posts about how difficult it was to deal with elderly family members who refused to accept their limitations. She had created a narrative in which she was the selfless caregiver and I was the confused, ungrateful old woman making everyone's life miserable. But now people were seeing the lawsuit. They were seeing the documented evidence of fraud. They were seeing the forged signatures and the stolen money and the credit cards I never applied for, and they were doing the math. They were realizing that the woman Karen had been complaining about, the confused elderly burden, had somehow managed to pay $600,000 in cash for the house Karen was living in. The comments on Karen's Facebook posts shifted overnight. People who had offered sympathy were now asking questions. Former friends were distancing themselves. Derek's colleagues were whispering. Derek called me 3 days after being served. His voice was different now. Smaller. He asked if we could talk, just the two of us, without lawyers. He said this had all gotten out of hand, that Karen had made some mistakes but she never meant any harm, that we were family and we should be able to work this out ourselves. I listened to him talk for about 5 minutes. Then I told him something I should have said years ago. I told him that being family meant something to me, that it had meant everything to me, that I had sacrificed my entire life to give him opportunities and advantages I never had. And I told him that he had taken that love and twisted it into something ugly, something transactional, something that existed only to benefit him. He started to interrupt, to make excuses. I didn't let him. I told him that the son I raised would never have stolen from his own mother. The son I raised would never have let his wife treat me like garbage in my own home. The son I raised would never have looked me in the eye and told me I deserved to be homeless because I made the mistake of trusting him. I told him that son was dead to me. Whether he ever existed or whether I just imagined him, it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I was done. Done being taken advantage of. Done being invisible. Done being the convenient mother who never asked for anything and accepted whatever crumbs she was given. He was quiet for a long time after that. Then he asked what I wanted. What would make this go away? I told him I wanted 3 things. First, I wanted every penny returned. The $93,000 from my savings, the $15,000 from my checking, the $27,000 from the fraudulent credit card, plus interest. Second, I wanted the house, not to live in. I never wanted to set foot in that house again, but I wanted it signed over to me so I could sell it and recoup my investment. Third, I wanted a public apology. I wanted him and Karen to post on social media, admitting what they had done. I wanted everyone who had read Karen's lies about me to read the truth. Derek said he couldn't do that. He said it would ruin them. His career, their reputation, everything they had built. I told him that was exactly the point. I told him he had tried to ruin me, to take everything I had worked for my entire life and leave me with nothing. Why should he get to walk away with his reputation intact? He hung up on me. I expected as much. The case went to mediation 2 months later. Derek and Karen showed up with their lawyer, a nervous-looking young man who clearly knew they had no leg to stand on. Patricia presented our evidence methodically, document by document, forged signature by forged signature, stolen dollar by stolen dollar. By the end of the session, Derek and Karen had agreed to everything. Every penny returned, the house transferred to my name, and the public statement, though their lawyer negotiated it down to a written acknowledgement that would become part of the court record rather than a social media post. I accepted. Not because I was being generous, but because I was tired of fighting, tired of thinking about the son I had lost, not to death but to something worse, to greed, to entitlement, to the belief that he deserved everything I had simply because I had given him everything for so long. The house sold for $640,000. After lawyer fees and taxes, I walked away with about $580,000, enough to start over, enough to build a new life at 71 years old. Michael helped me find a small cottage on a lake in Vermont, 2 bedrooms, a little garden, a dock where I can sit in the mornings and watch the mist rise off the water. It cost $230,000. I have enough left to live comfortably for the rest of my life without ever worrying about money again. I don't hear from Derek anymore. According to Michael, who keeps tabs on these things even though I ask him not to, Derek and Karen divorced 8 months after the settlement. Apparently their marriage couldn't survive the removal of my money. Karen moved back to her parents' house. Derek is renting an apartment somewhere, working at a different company because too many people at his old job knew what he had done. Sometimes I wonder if I should have been more forgiving. Sometimes late at night, I remember Derek as a little boy, crying for his daddy, clinging to me like I was the only solid thing in his world. I remember the promises I made to always take care of him. I remember the mother I used to be, the one who would have given him anything, forgiven him anything. But then I remember his voice when he told me I should have thought about my future before giving everything away. I remember Karen's cold eyes when she told me to leave my own home. I remember the forged signatures and the stolen money and the years of being treated like a burden in a house I paid for. And I know I made the right choice. Not the easy choice. Not the choice that let me keep pretending I had a son who loved me. But the right choice. The choice to love myself enough to stop accepting abuse just because it came wrapped in family. I'm 72 now. I've been in my cottage for almost a year. I have friends here, other retirees who have found their way to this quiet corner of the world. We play cards on Tuesday nights. We take walks along the lake on Sunday mornings. We talk about our lives, our regrets, our hard-won wisdom. Michael visits every month. He flew his family out for Christmas, and my grandchildren built a snowman in my front yard. I watched them from the window, holding a cup of coffee, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Real peace. The kind that comes from knowing you are exactly where you're supposed to be. I used to think being a mother meant endless sacrifice. I used to think love meant giving until you had nothing left. I used to think that if I just gave enough, did enough, sacrificed enough, I would be loved in return. But I learned something in my 71st year that I wish I had learned decades earlier. I learned that love is not a transaction. You cannot buy it, no matter how much you give, and you cannot earn it from people who see you only as a resource to be exploited. Real love, the kind that sustains you through the hard times, comes from people who see you as you are and choose to stand beside you anyway. It comes from a son who drops everything to fly across the country when his mother needs him. It comes from friends who welcome you into their card games and their Sunday walks without asking for anything in return. It comes from yourself, from the decision to treat yourself with the same kindness and protection you would offer to anyone you loved. I close my eyes at night now and I sleep soundly. I wake up in the morning to the sound of birds and the gentle lapping of the lake against the dock. I tend my garden. I read my books. I live my life on my own terms, answering to no one, apologizing for nothing. Derek took a lot from me. Money, time, trust, the belief that my sacrifices would be rewarded with love. But he couldn't take this. He couldn't take the knowledge that I survived him, that I rebuilt my life without him, that I found happiness not in spite of losing him, but because I finally let him go. Some people might say I was too harsh. Some people might say a mother should forgive her children no matter what. But I think those people have never sat in an empty room, surrounded by evidence of betrayal, realizing that the child they devoted their life to sees them as nothing more than a bank account with legs. I forgive Derek for being human. I forgive him for being weak, for being greedy, for being the kind of person who takes the easy path even when it hurts someone else. But forgiveness doesn't mean I have to let him back into my life. Forgiveness doesn't mean I have to pretend it never happened. Forgiveness, for me, means I have stopped letting his betrayal poison my present. I have stopped replaying the hurt over and over in my mind. I have stopped asking what I did wrong, what I could have done differently. The answer to those questions doesn't matter anymore. What matters is this moment, this day, this life I have built from the ashes of the one he tried to burn down. My name is Dorothy Ann Mitchell. I am 72 years old. I am a retired nurse, a mother, a grandmother, and a survivor. I paid $600,000 for a lesson that should have been free. The lesson that your worth is not determined by how much you give, and your love should never be given to people who don't deserve it. If you're listening to this, and you recognize yourself in my story, if you have a child or a family member who takes and never gives back, I want you to know something. It's not too late. It's never too late to stand up for yourself. It's never too late to say enough. It's never too late to choose yourself over someone who would never choose you. You are worth more than what you can provide. You are worth more than your bank account or your house or your willingness to sacrifice. You are worth love, real love, the kind that doesn't come with conditions or price tags. And if someone can't see that, if someone looks at you and sees only what they can take, then that person doesn't deserve a place in your life. Family or not, blood or not, history or not. You deserve peace. You deserve respect. You deserve to sit by a lake and watch the mist rise and know that you are safe, you are valued, and you are finally free. That's my story. That's how my daughter-in-law tried to steal my house and my son helped her. And that's how I took back everything and found something I never expected to find at 71 years old. I found myself